The cursor blinked, a steady rhythmic pulse on a digital contract worth more than my car. The voice on the other end of the line, a potential client from a San Francisco tech firm, was saying all the right things. Your portfolio is exactly what we need, Maya. Clean, discreet, effective. I could feel the tension in my shoulders begin to ease for the first time in a week. This contract would be my foundation, the solid ground I needed to rebuild my career piece by piece. That's when the screaming started. It wasn't a sound of terror. It was a sound of pure, undiluted rage, the kind that scrapes the sky on a hot summer day. I muted my microphone, my heart sinking. Through the window of my home office, I saw it. A delivery truck was parked awkwardly, half on the street, half on the scorched grass of the verge. The driver, a kid who couldn't have been more than 20, stood with his hands up in a gesture of helpless surrender, and between him and the road stood Karen. Karen, our homeowners association president. She wasn't just standing there. She was a monument to fury, hair the color of bleached straw, a polo shirt stretched tight across her chest, and arms crossed with the finality of a guillotine. She was pointing at the massive decorative boulders she'd had installed last month, the ones that narrowed our shared private driveway to a single, unforgiving lane. The heat rising from the asphalt seemed to shimmer around her. The air smelled of hot tar and the dry, dusty scent of dying summer lawns. The driver was trying to explain. "Ma'am, I can't get through. These rocks, I just have a package from Ms. Torres. This is a residential community, not a commercial loading dock." Karen's voice cut through the thick air. "You are violating our community standards." I took a deep breath, trying to hold on to the calm of my client call. But the calm was gone. Karen turned, her eyes scanning the houses, and locked onto me, sitting in my window. A cold, triumphant smile spread across her face. This wasn't about the truck. It was about me. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at my house. "And you, your constant deliveries. This is a business you're running, isn't it? That's against the bylaws." Have you ever had one of those moments? A moment where you can see the next month of your life turning into an absolute nightmare, all because of one person's petty crusade? If you've been watching Karenology, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's never just a misunderstanding. "That's $1,000 fine, Ms. Torres," she shouted, her voice echoing in the quiet cul-de-sac. $1,000. Maybe that will teach you some respect for our rules. My hand, resting on my desk, brushed against my keychain. My fingers found the cool, smooth metal of a small, encrypted USB drive. It was a relic from my old life, a reminder of a career that had been torched by lies and backstabbing. On it was the proof of my innocence, proof I'd never used. It was a tiny anchor of a past I was trying to escape. I squeezed it, the sharp edges digging into my palm. The delivery driver, defeated, got back in his truck and began the painstaking process of backing out. Karen stood there, watching him go, a smug queen surveying her conquered territory. For a moment, I just sat there, the silent, blinking cursor on the screen forgotten. The client was probably wondering if I'd been abducted by aliens. This wasn't just an argument. This was an attack on my livelihood, on the fragile peace I had fought so hard to build. If this story hits close to home for you, you know exactly what to do with that like button. A few days passed in a tense quiet. I managed to salvage the client call with an apology and a story about a sudden plumbing emergency. But I felt like I was living on borrowed time. Then the letter arrived. It wasn't the usual cheap envelope from the homeowners association with a photocopied notice. This was different. Heavy cream-colored paper, an embossed letterhead. It wasn't from the HOA. It was from a law firm I'd never heard of, Apex Compliance Solutions. My hands felt cold as I read it. The $1,000 fine was there, in stark black ink. But they'd added another violation. Creating a hazardous obstruction for emergency service vehicles, it read, citing my history of commercial deliveries. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. Her boulders were the obstruction. But this letter, with its cold, precise legal jargon, made it sound like I was the villain. This wasn't Karen's usual playbook. This was coordinated, professional. I walked back to my desk, the letter trembling slightly in my hand. I sat down and typed Apex Compliance Solutions into my search bar. My OSINT instincts, the skills that had been my sword and my shield for years, were screaming. As I stared at the first page of search results, a cold wave washed over me. This wasn't just a nosy neighbor with too much time on her hands. This was a corporation, and they had just made a very, very big mistake. The corporate logo for Apex Compliance Solutions glowed on my screen. It was slick, sterile, and completely soulless. The kind of design that costs $10,000 and says absolutely nothing. Their website was a fortress of corporate buzzwords: synergy, optimization, proactive solutions. But behind the polished facade, there was nothing. No team photos, no case studies. The address was a mail drop in Delaware. It was a ghost, a digital scarecrow designed to look intimidating. Funny thing is, I hunt ghosts for a living. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I wasn't just searching anymore, I was excavating. I pulled up the corporate registration records. Apex Compliance had been formed just 6 weeks ago. I cross-referenced the name of the registered agent, a shell service, and found a link. A single digital thread connecting it to another, much larger entity. A name that made the hairs on my arms stand up. Apex Development. Now, Apex Development, I knew. They were a notoriously aggressive developer that had been trying to buy up land on the outskirts of our town for years. They specialized in bulldozing quiet neighborhoods to put up high-density condos nobody wanted. They had a reputation for getting what they wanted, one way or another. And suddenly, Karen's obsession with my driveway didn't seem so random. The boulders, the compliance firm, the targeted fines. It was all part of a larger machine. My phone buzzed, pulling me out of the digital rabbit hole. It was an email notification from my professional portfolio site. The subject line made my stomach clench. "You have a new review." I clicked it open. 1 star. The review was from a Mark P. I'd never worked with a Mark P. The text was brutal. "Highly unprofessional," it read. "Communication was poor, and we had serious concerns about data security. Would not recommend." It was a lie, crafted with just enough corporate jargon to sound credible. My phone buzzed again. Another email, another 1-star review. This one claimed I missed deadlines and that my work was subpar. It was happening in real time, a coordinated digital assault. They weren't just trying to find me into submission, they were trying to erase me professionally. Then the phone rang. The caller ID showed the San Francisco area code. It was the client. "Maya," he started, his voice strained. "Something's come up. We monitor the professional profiles of all our contractors. A few reviews just appeared on your page." "They're fake," I said, my voice coming out colder than I intended. "It's a targeted attack." "I believe you," he said, and for a second I felt a flicker of hope. "I do, but our board won't see it that way. We're in a sensitive phase and we can't afford even the perception of a security risk. I'm sorry, the contract, it's on hold, indefinitely." The line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand. $10,000. Gone. Just like that. The foundation I was trying to build had just been dynamited. This wasn't about Karen's power trip anymore. This was a corporate hit job. They had found my weak spot, the fragile trust my entire freelance career was built on, and they had pushed a knife right into it. Have you ever been hit so hard you can't even breathe? You just sit there in the ringing silence and realize the fight you thought you were in is not the real fight at all. The real fight is bigger, dirtier, and you are completely, utterly alone. The glowing screen with the fake reviews seemed to mock me. The digital ghosts were no longer just whispers in the code. They had a name, and they had just drawn first blood. For a long minute, I just sat there in the ringing silence, the dead phone in my hand. It's a funny thing, getting punched digitally. There's no bruise, no blood, just a cold hollowing sensation in your gut. They had found my professional life, the one I had so carefully built out of the ashes of my old one, and they had set it on fire. You know what they say? Don't get mad, get data. I pushed my chair back, the wheels groaning in protest, and walked to the window. Outside, the Arizona sun was merciless. It baked the identical beige houses and the unnaturally green lawns into a state of shimmering perfection. It all looked so orderly, so peaceful. But I knew better now. Beneath the surface, there were wires, connections, and a plan. And Karen with her decorative boulders was just the tip of the spear. My brain was already working on a new angle, Apex Development. They were the real enemy, but why this elaborate high-tech assault on a single freelance consultant? It didn't make sense. The cost of the reputation attack alone had to be more than my fines. They weren't trying to punish me. They were trying to silence me, or get me out. Why? I went back to the archives of my mind, to the digital breadcrumbs I'd found earlier. Apex's failed attempt to rezone the neighborhood 5 years ago. I dug into the old county planning commission minutes. The records were dry, full of procedural jargon, but one name kept appearing in opposition. A Mr. Henderson. My next search was simpler. Henderson, same zip code. One result. He lived 3 streets over. Have you ever had to approach a complete stranger for help? Someone who has no reason to trust you and every reason to tell you to get lost. It's a humbling experience. I grabbed my keys, the useless USB drive clinking against them, and walked out into the oppressive heat. The walk to Henderson's house felt like a mile. Every manicured lawn, every cheerfully painted front door felt like a part of a conspiracy. His house was different. The lawn was neat, but not obsessively so. There were practical drought-resistant plants instead of fussy flower beds. I rang the bell. The door was opened by a man in his late 70s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that sized me up in a single glance. He had the tired, cynical look of a man who'd spent his life dealing with bureaucracy. "Mr. Henderson?" I asked. "Depends who's asking," he said, his voice a low grumble. He didn't open the screen door. "My name is Maya Torres. I live on Crestview Lane. I need to ask you about Apex Development." His eyes narrowed. A flicker of something, annoyance, maybe memory, passed over his face. "That name, haven't heard it in a while, and I was having a good day. I'm retired, Ms. Torres." He started to close the door. "They're back," I said quickly, "and they're using the homeowners association to push people out. You were the city planner who stopped their rezoning proposal 5 years ago. I need to know why." He stopped. He looked at me, really looked at me, for a full 10 seconds. Then he let out a long, weary sigh and unlatched the screen door. "You've done your homework," he grumbled. "Fine, come in, but I'm not making coffee." His house smelled of old books and dust. He pointed me to a worn armchair and sat down opposite me. I laid it all out. Karen, the boulders, the fake compliance firm, the digital attacks, the lost contract. He listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he was silent for a moment. Then he leaned forward. "They didn't tell you the real reason their proposal was denied, did they?" he asked. "It wasn't about zoning density or traffic. It was about water." He explained that our entire neighborhood was built on old, undersized water mains from the 70s. They were fine for residential use, but for the high-density condos Apex wanted to build, they were a death trap. The system can't provide the legal minimum water pressure for a multi-story fire suppression system, he said, his voice low. "The fire hydrants out here, they're barely adequate for our houses. For a condo tower, they're useless." A light went on in my head, a cold, terrifying light. It wasn't about aesthetics, it wasn't about my home business. "So if there was a fire," I started, "the insurance would be void, the city would be liable. The whole project would be a catastrophic failure," he finished. He stood up and walked to a cluttered bookshelf. He pulled out a thick-bound report. "This is the original hydrological survey. Apex tried to bury it then, and I'm sure they'll try to bury it now." He handed it to me. The paper felt heavy, real. "This is your ammunition. But here's the thing you need to understand, Ms. Torres. These people don't play by the rules. They rewrite them. They don't just bury reports." He paused, his eyes locking onto mine. "They bury people too. Figuratively speaking, of course." I walked home under the setting sun, the heavy report tucked under my arm like a shield. The world looked different now. Every fire hydrant I passed seemed to stare at me, a silent red sentinel guarding a dangerous secret. It all clicked into place. The boulders weren't just to block my driveway, they were a deliberate photogenic obstruction of a hydrant, a piece of evidence they were manufacturing. They weren't just trying to get me out. They were building a case to declare the entire neighborhood a fire hazard, making it ripe for a lowball buyout. The next homeowners association meeting was in the community clubhouse, a sterile room that always smelled faintly of chlorine and stale coffee. I came prepared. I had my copy of the bylaws, and Henderson's report was in my bag. I was ready for a fight on paper. I wasn't ready for what they did next. Karen opened the meeting with a smug smile. "We have a wonderful announcement tonight," she chirped. She gestured to a man in a crisp suit standing at the back of the room. He stepped forward, radiating the kind of predatory charm that sets your teeth on edge. "Good evening, everyone," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "My name is Richard Sterling, and I'm a senior partner at Apex Development." A murmur went through the room. Most of my neighbors looked confused. A few, the ones I knew were on Karen's team, looked triumphant. I stood up. "Mr. Sterling, what is your business here? This is a private meeting for homeowners." He gave me a patient smile, the kind you'd give a difficult child. "I'm here as a friend of the community, Ms. Torres. You see, your president, Karen, brought a number of compliance issues to our attention, fines that have been levied. It seems some of you are struggling." He made a show of looking sympathetic. He continued, his voice dripping with false generosity. "Apex Development believes in being a good neighbor. That's why we've decided to make a gesture of goodwill. We are prepared to pay off every outstanding fine owed by any homeowner in this community." The room erupted. People who had been glaring at Karen moments before were now looking at her like a savior. The weight of hundreds, even thousands of dollars in petty fines was being lifted from their shoulders. I saw the relief on their faces, and I felt sick. It was a bribe, a brilliant legal public bribe. "What's the catch?" I asked, my voice cutting through the chatter. The room went silent. All eyes were on me. Sterling's smile never wavered. "No catch," he said smoothly. "Just a small request. We are once again proposing a revitalization project for this area, a project that will increase property values for everyone. All we ask is for your support at the next county planning meeting. In fact," he added, pulling a sheaf of papers from his briefcase, "we have a simple petition of support right here. Sign it, and your fines are forgiven. Today." It was a masterstroke. He was using their financial pain that Karen had inflicted, to buy their loyalty. He had turned me into the enemy. I was the one standing between them and financial freedom. "Don't you see what this is?" I pleaded, turning to my neighbors. "This is a setup. They're not trying to help you. They're trying to buy this land for pennies on the dollar." I held up the report. "This is about fire safety. Our water system can't support their project. They know it, and they're trying to trick you into—" Karen cut me off. "Ms. Torres is upset because she received the largest fine," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "She's trying to ruin this for everyone out of spite." Someone in the back yelled, "Sit down, Torres. Don't mess this up for us." The tide had turned completely. They saw me as the villain, the crazy woman with her conspiracy theories. I looked around at the faces of my neighbors. They weren't my allies. They were a mob, ready to sacrifice their long-term safety for short-term relief. I was publicly humiliated, completely isolated. This was my point of breaking. I had the truth in my hands, a damning official report, and it was utterly worthless. Worse than worthless. It had made me a pariah. I looked at Sterling. He met my gaze and gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. A final twist of the knife. He knew he had won. I watched as my neighbors, people I'd shared greetings and cups of sugar with, lined up to sign his petition, their faces beaming. The sound of their cheerful chatter was the sound of my defeat. I drove home from the meeting in a daze. The streetlights painted long, lonely stripes across the road. The weight of the hydrological report on the passenger seat felt immense, a heavy tombstone for the truth. I had walked into that clubhouse with facts, with logic, with proof, and I had been defeated by the oldest trick in the book, greed. Have you ever felt that? The sting of being right, but being powerless? It's a special kind of hell. If you're still with me on this, I appreciate you. Maybe drop a subscribe, because what happened next is something you won't want to miss. I spent the next 2 days in a funk, watching my neighbors celebrate their victory. There was a new energy in the neighborhood, a sense of cheerful optimism that felt like a personal insult. People who used to wave now looked through me. Karen would drive by, slowing down just enough to give me a triumphant smirk. The digital assault on my reputation had paused, but the damage was done. My professional life was a crater. My community had turned on me. I was an island. On the third night, I was sitting in my dark office, staring at the screen of my laptop. I was rewatching the security footage from the clubhouse meeting. I don't know what I was looking for. A sign, a tell, anything. I watched myself stand up, voice cracking with desperation. I watched Sterling, slick and confident, and then I saw it. It was Karen's husband, a quiet, mousy man named Frank, who was on the HOA board. While Sterling was giving his grand speech, the camera caught Frank in the background. He wasn't cheering. He wasn't even watching. He was staring at the floor, his hand fiddling with something on his lapel, a small, shiny pin. I zoomed in. The image was grainy, but the shape was unmistakable. It was a small, enameled pin shaped like a firefighter's helmet. It was just a pin, a meaningless piece of flair, but it was an anomaly, a piece of data that didn't fit. Why would Frank, a meek accountant, be fidgeting with a firefighter's pin during a moment of triumph? My mind raced back to what Henderson had said. The system can't provide the legal minimum water pressure, the hydrants, the fire risk. I started a new search, this time on Frank. Public records, social media, the usual deep dive. He was exactly what he appeared to be, an accountant with a passion for gardening. No connections to firefighting, no history of heroism. But then I found a photo from a local charity auction 2 years ago. There he was, standing next to his brother. And his brother was wearing the uniform of the city's fire marshal. A cold, electric thrill shot through me. It wasn't a direct connection, but it was a path, a weak signal in the noise. Frank wasn't just nervous, he was terrified. He knew the fire safety issue was real, and his brother's position meant he understood exactly what it implied. He was an accomplice to a massive fraud, and his conscience was eating him alive. I looked at the clock. It was almost 11 p.m. Too late to call Henderson, too late to do anything rational. But I wasn't feeling rational. I was feeling the sharp, exhilarating focus that comes when you finally see a crack in the wall. Frank was the weak link. Karen was the face. Sterling was the brain. But Frank was the trembling hand holding it all together. I thought about what to do. Confront him? Send him an anonymous email with a picture of his brother? No. That was their game, the game of digital threats and intimidation. I had to play a different one. I needed something real, something undeniable, something that couldn't be dismissed as a conspiracy theory. I looked out the window at the silent, sleeping houses. The fire hydrant on the corner gleamed under a streetlight. The problem with a lie is that it has to be perfect. The truth just has to be revealed. And I realized my mistake. I had been trying to fight their story with another story, a report, a history. But what I needed wasn't a story. I needed a demonstration. I needed to stop talking about the water pressure and start showing it. And Frank, with his guilty secret and his firefighter brother, was going to be my unwilling audience. I picked up my phone, not to make a call, but to set an alarm for 5 a.m. The show was about to begin. The 5 a.m. alarm was a brutal slice through the darkness. I was running on fumes and fury, a potent combination. I pulled on a dark hoodie and slipped out of my house. The air was cool and still, carrying the scent of damp earth and sleeping flowers. The neighborhood was a ghost town, bathed in the pale, pre-dawn light. This was my territory now. My plan was simple, almost childishly so. It was also deeply, profoundly risky. I walked to the edge of my property line, to the main water shutoff valve for my house, half hidden under a metal plate in the grass. I had a wrench. I wasn't going to break anything. I was just going to conduct a little experiment in fluid dynamics. I took a deep breath and sent a text message. It was to an anonymous pay-as-you-go burner phone number that my research had linked to Frank. It was a long shot, but terrified people do stupid things, like keep a burner phone. The message was simple. Meet me at the hydrant on the corner of Crestview and Oak, now. If you don't, I send the video of last night's meeting and the hydrological report to your brother, the fire marshal. Then I turned the valve, not all the way off, just enough to restrict the flow to my own house by about 70%. Then I went inside, turned on every faucet, every shower, the dishwasher, the washing machine. I was creating a sudden, massive artificial demand on the local water line, a stress test. I waited. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of gushing water inside my house. 5 minutes passed. 10. Had he ignored it? Was the number dead? Then, a shadow detached itself from a house down the street. It was Frank. He was in his pajamas, a robe thrown hastily over them. He looked pale and sick, his face illuminated by the harsh glow of his phone. He scurried to the corner, looking around nervously, and stopped by the hydrant. He was there. The bait was taken. I walked out to meet him, my footsteps loud in the silence. He jumped when he saw me. "What do you want?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do, Frank," I said, my voice low and calm. "You know exactly what I'm talking about. You know this whole development deal is built on a lie. You know those hydrants are starved for water, and you know what happens in a real fire when the pressure is this low." He shook his head, refusing to meet my eyes. "It's not my problem. It becomes your brother's problem, Frank. It becomes his career on the line when this goes bad, and it will go bad." I let that sink in. This is the moment, isn't it? The ethical fork in the road. I could have leaned on him, blackmailed him, forced him to testify, but that would just make me another version of them. What would you do in that situation? Turn the screw or offer a way out? "I'm not going to expose you, Frank," I said, and he finally looked up, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. "I'm going to expose the problem, and you're going to help me, unintentionally." I pulled out my own phone and dialed 911. Frank's face went white. "What are you doing?" he hissed. 911, what is your emergency?" The operator's voice chirped from my phone. "Hello," I said, my voice clear and steady. "My name is Maya Torres. I live at 112 Crestview Lane. I'm standing on the corner of Crestview and Oak, and I'm smelling smoke. I think it might be coming from my house." I disconnected the call before the operator could respond. Frank stared at me, horrified. "You're insane," he breathed. "They'll be here in 3 minutes," I said, ignoring him. "They'll see the smoke is nothing. But what do you think is the first thing they do when they get a fire call in a neighborhood with a known hydrant access issue? The issue your wife so kindly created for them?" He didn't need to answer. His face told me everything. They would check the hydrant. It was protocol. My little stress test, combined with the pre-dawn pressure drop, would tell a story no report ever could. They wouldn't be testing the system on an average Tuesday afternoon. They'd be testing it now at its absolute weakest. In the distance, I heard the faint, rising wail of a siren. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Frank looked like he was about to collapse. "You can go home now, Frank," I said quietly. "This part has nothing to do with you." He didn't need to be told twice. He turned and practically ran back to the safety of his house, a ghost disappearing into the gloom. The siren grew louder, closer. The flashing lights began to paint the trees in strobing reds and blues. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for the professionals to walk into it. The fire engine rounded the corner, its siren winding down to a low growl. It was a massive, beautiful beast of a machine, and it dwarfed Karen's decorative boulders. 2 firefighters jumped out, their faces grim and professional. I stood there, arms crossed, the picture of a concerned homeowner. "Ma'am, you called about smoke?" one of them asked, already scanning my roofline. "I thought I did," I said, pointing. "Right over my garage, but I don't see anything now. Maybe a neighbor's barbecue." He didn't look convinced, but he was calm. "We'll check it out. Hey, Cap," he called back to the truck. "We got those access issues here. Let's hook up and check the pressure, just in case." It was happening, exactly as I knew it would. They saw the boulders, remembered the official complaint Karen had so helpfully filed, and followed protocol. One of the firefighters grabbed a heavy wrench and attached it to the hydrant's operating nut. The other connected a pressure gauge to one of the outlets. This was it, the non-documentary evidence, the live test. He opened the valve. Instead of the powerful roar of water, there was a pathetic wheezing gasp. Water dribbled out, dark and sluggish. The needle on the pressure gauge barely moved. It quivered, then settled on a number so low it was laughable. The fire captain, a man with a weathered face and 20 years of experience in his eyes, walked over and stared at the gauge. He looked at the hydrant. He looked at my house. Then he looked at me. He knew. You don't spend a lifetime fighting fires without understanding water. He knew this wasn't just a weak hydrant. This was a dead zone, a neighborhood waiting to burn. "This is unacceptable," he said, his voice a low rumble of anger. "This is a public safety failure." He pulled out his radio. As if on cue, a sleek black sedan pulled up. Richard Sterling from Apex Development got out, followed by a frantic-looking Karen. They must have heard the sirens. The look on Sterling's face was pure panic. This was not part of his plan. "What's going on here, Captain?" Sterling asked, trying to sound authoritative. Just a false alarm, I presume? The captain turned to him, his eyes like chips of ice. Your false alarm just revealed that this hydrant couldn't put out a campfire, let alone a house fire. The pressure is less than half the legal minimum. That's impossible, Karen stammered. Is it? I said, stepping forward. I held up Henderson's report. Because this hydrological survey from 5 years ago says it's not only possible, it's a known issue, an issue Apex Development was fully aware of. Sterling's mask of charm dissolved. He saw the report, the fire captain's furious face, the undeniable reading on the pressure gauge. He was trapped. His entire scheme, built on manipulating bylaws and digital lies, was undone by a simple law of physics. And here was my final choice, the ethical fork I had been heading towards all along. The day before, I'd received a panicked call. It was from a lawyer representing Apex. They'd somehow figured out I was digging deeper. He offered to wipe my record clean, pay me $20,000 in damages, and personally ensure Karen was removed from the HOA board. All I had to do was stop. I told him I'd think about it. Looking at Sterling's desperate face, I made my decision. This was never about the money. It was about the principle. The final blow didn't come from me. It came from a man who had just arrived, drawn by the commotion. It was Henderson. He walked right up to the fire captain and handed him his own copy of the report. "Captain," he said, his voice firm, "I'm the retired city planner who commissioned this survey. I'd be happy to give a statement to whomever you'd like. I'm also sending a copy to the county's chief legal counsel and the underwriter for Apex's liability insurance." That was the kill shot, the insurance. Without it, no bank would fund their project. No permit would be issued. The entire multi-million-dollar scheme evaporated right there on the curb, in the cool morning air. Sterling didn't say a word. He just got back in his car and drove away. Karen stood frozen, her face a mask of disbelief and ruin. In the end, I won. The project died. Karen was disgraced and eventually forced to sell her house. The boulders were removed, but victory came with a price. I was no longer the quiet consultant. I was the woman who had taken on the system. Some neighbors saw me as a hero. Others feared me. The quiet anonymity I once craved was gone forever. Later that day, I sat at my desk and picked up the encrypted USB drive, the symbol of my past failure. For years, it had been a reminder of a fight I had run from. But I wasn't that person anymore. I dragged the drive's icon to the trash bin on my desktop and clicked empty trash. The data, the proof that could have saved my old career, was gone. It didn't matter anymore. I had fought a new fight, and I had won it on my own terms. The quiet life was over. But for the first time in a long time, I felt free.